The Women's World Cup Show
on Off the Ball
with Sure Non-Stop Protection Deodorant, official sponsor of the FIFA Women's World Cup 2023.
You are very welcome along to the Women's World Cup show here on Off the Ball, with thanks to Sure Non-Stop Protection Deodorant, official sponsor of the FIFA Women's World Cup. It's all eyes now on Perth in Ireland's second game at the tournament, hoping to bounce back from the defeat against the co-host Australia last week as they take on the Olympic champions Canada tomorrow lunchtime. Delighted to say Sinead O'Carroll and Kathleen McNamee join me from Australia. How are we getting on?
Yeah, all
doing
good.
We've
had a busy day of press conferences, walkabouts the pitch and lashing rain. Yeah, it's been an interesting
adjusting to the jet lag.
It's another time zone to have to contend with, which the players have had to do as well, Kathleen. But all eyes, as Sinead mentioned, on training today, because you got kind of a few tidbits from Vera Pauw at the press conference this morning about fitness concerns, particularly around Louise Quinn. But then we were watching a potential second injury concern for tomorrow at training as well.
Yeah, so Heather Payne sat out a lot of the training session today, and she did have her right leg strapped. Now, having talked to a couple of people, they said this is probably more a precautionary thing in managing her load more than it was something to be massively concerned about. And Vera was very clear in her press conference earlier that she wanted to be totally honest with everyone that was there in terms of what the team was actually facing. So Louise kind of remains the player that we're mostly concerned about. It was kind of a weird situation where the FAI released a statement just before the press conference that kind of gave the impression that Louise would be okay and that she had trained fine. But then over the course of the evening, it turned out that her training sessions were just running sessions. They weren't actually contact. And tonight, the contact training was kind of going to decide whether she starts tomorrow or not. I think it's kind of been a weird lead up for both of these games for the Ireland team, because if we said of the 3 or 5 players that we don't want to get injured ahead of a game, Denise, Louise are going to be like the top people that you think of in that context. So hopefully she came out of training okay, and Vera thinks she's able to play. I think Louise herself would probably play if she was on one leg, but she came out particularly battered from that last game. So the top of your mind is obviously player wellness, but you hope that she's there. And if not, we have good players that can step into the fold there. You know, you look at the likes of Diane Caldwell, who are incredibly experienced. And even if it means that Louise can only play a certain amount of time, I think we should be covered one way or the other.
I don't think, Sinead, that a risk will be taken if Louise Quinn is not able to take to the field, such as how important tomorrow afternoon's fixture is. But I'm sure Louise Quinn would be absolutely desperate to play in this game.
Yeah, for me, one of the Canadian journalists asked, it was one of the first questions, which is testament to how good Louise is and how important she is to the way that we play. Like, I think Denise and Katie are both better footballers, but I think in the way that we set up and the way that Vera Pauw's system is actually Louise is pretty much up there with the two of them, I think, in terms of importance. So yeah, the Canadian journalists were asking me, like, is Louise Quinn going to be okay? And I was like, it would take a lot for Louise Quinn not to be okay for tomorrow. And while it's not one of the big questions in the press conference is it a must win or a must draw? Like, while it's not really a complete must win, I think it's more important that Louise plays tomorrow than it would be maybe to like try and hold off and save her so that she can play against Nigeria. So, you know, even if it's a question of, you know, just dealing with whatever pain comes tomorrow and just sorting it out later in the tournament or later in the year, or making it a problem that the clubs have to worry about come August, I think that's what the situation will be with Louise. Personally, I think if it was her own decision, that's what it would be. But I think even from an FAI and Vera Pauw decision-making viewpoint, that's what it's going to be as well.
Kathleen, you spotted the Heather Payne precaution at training today, and it would seem in the last few hours this is a hamstring issue, but not potentially one that keeps her out of the game, but one that's just being managed at the moment.
Yeah, from what I hear, that's what it is. I chatted to a couple of people that I know within the setup, and the general feeling that I got was that it was more precautionary than anything else. It said that she had tweaked it like a couple of days ago, and not like a major tweak, but also just wanting to make sure she was okay in the long term. So hopefully it's not anything serious. Hopefully it is just what they're saying in terms of it being managing her load and making sure she is okay for tomorrow. I think as much as Sinead is saying, any of those players who have been in the starting 11, who have been solidly in Vera's top choice, all of them are going to want to make it on the pitch tomorrow. So they're going to do whatever they can to be there. And Vera did say in her press conference when she was talking, and again, I always take these things with like a slight pinch of salt. But Emma Duffy, who works for the 42, she asked her the question of, is everyone else fit in the squad? And Vera was like, yes, I'm always 100% honest. Everyone else is fit and fine. That's why it was a little bit of a surprise that Heather sat out and also had the wrap on her leg. It's just one of those ones that's really hard to balance up the information that you're hearing and what you're seeing and actually knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, we saw it with Australia last week before the game. Sam Kerr was put up for media and by all intents and purposes, she was starting. And then all of a sudden, an hour before the game, she wasn't. So we don't know if similar things are going on now.
It was so funny, Kathleen, because when she said that thing of like, I'm always honest, I don't think it's the winning or losing of a game. I thought that was quite a pointed dig at Tony Gustafsson.
Yeah.
And then when we arrived at training, I was like, only 15 minutes ago, Vera Pauw was telling us that she was open and honest and she didn't think there was any point in lying about injuries. And I'm like,
but it's also
that's a fairly significant strapping on Heather Payne's leg. And Heather is... like the reason that she's on the team is for her pace, and for the fact that she can run up and down that wing. Like she can't play like Katie McCabe can play, but she can run up the wing like Katie McCabe can run up and down that wing. You can't do that with a tweaked hamstring. That's way more dangerous to our starting 11 than Louise Quinn being in a bit of pain. Like Louise Quinn can manage a bit of pain on a bruised bone much more than we can manage a tweaked hamstring on one of our fastest players' legs. So
it's also such a classic Vera line though as well, where she says to the media constantly, like, I'm always obvious, I'm telling you the absolute truth. And then there's a trickle down effect where that doesn't always tend to be all that true, especially when it comes to players. So the minute she said that, I was kind of like, is there something else going on? And then training kind of proved that there was.
Say, Kathleen, if Heather Payne gets assessed tonight or into tomorrow and it turns out the hamstring injury is worse than first feared, can't play, who's the alternative at right wing back then for tomorrow?
This is the thing, I think it really depends on what goes on with the rest of the squad. So if Louise is fit, who do you put in there? And also there's still that sort of debate in the midfield as well. Is Abby Larkin going to come in for Marissa Shiva? And how does that shift around the team? So I think there's a lot of decisions that have to be made tomorrow. And I'm really, really curious to see, does Vera actually throw the book at things in the way that she hasn't before? Because I actually think, as Sinead said earlier, this is the game that you want to do it in, because if we don't get a result tomorrow, it's putting an awful lot of pressure on the Nigeria game and an awful lot of pressure on the entire squad, rather than actually giving some players a little bit of an opportunity tomorrow. We were having this debate at dinner tonight about whether Abby Larkin should or shouldn't start. And in games where she has started, she's been a little bit starstruck. But then in games that she's come on and in the last couple of months, she's performed incredibly well. So what do you do in that situation? I'm fully certain that Vera is sitting whichever hotel she is in Perth right now with a massive headache, trying to work out what the best thing to actually do is.
Sinead, it seems the approach isn't necessarily going to change here, because I was reading Vera Pauw's comments and she was asked about the defensive structure particularly, and said, we've got some fantastic defenders, they're not the quickest, so if you don't have cover, then we need 5 or 6 one-on-ones could potentially happen on the goalkeeper if we don't have pace on the wings to cover. Says they're getting better and better, but she made it very clear that they won't be making any sweeping changes to approach. So even if the personnel is maybe going to be switched around a little bit, I think we're to expect something similar to the setup against Australia here.
Yeah, she answers the question around whether we have to have 5 at the back. She's been asked, is the earth round? It's well, we have to have 5 at the back. It's just a fact. And when she explains it, Vera can be very convincing when she explains things. And when she says, we have fantastic defenders, but they're slow, you can't really argue against that. When we were watching Louise Quinn today, you're going, okay, yeah, no, she looks fine on that ankle. And then one of the lads said, well, she looked a bit slow there. And you're like, well, like that doesn't mean that she's any different. Like, Louise isn't the fastest player in the world. She's, 6 foot.
That's what we had when we had Aoife Mannion in the squad. That was the one player that brought it in.
Oh God, like Aoife Mannion, the player that we only had for 2 games, but we miss her more than you can imagine. Like, just the depth perception changes so much. So for me, there's absolutely, there's going to be 5 at the back. She's not going to change that, but the personnel does change it a lot. So whether she has a bit of freedom to allow Katie to not be like specifically like chained to left back for entire 90 minutes, whether, if Heather's available, can, she play a little bit more offensively? Can she free up, like last week, Sinead Farrelly and Niamh Fahey were very much protecting Heather, because I think it was very obvious that the Australians, that was the person they were targeting. Sinead Farrelly is more offensive minded, but she was very much protecting Heather for the whole of the first 60 minutes or 50 minutes whenever Sinead Farrelly came off. So that was part of the reason why a lot of the it wasn't necessarily the personnel change, but it was the system changed. And obviously Australia were playing a lot different, because they were just defending a lead rather than, it being 0-0. So I don't know, for me, if Heather Payne's out, it's probably a direct swap with Anya O'Gorman, and then you do probably get less options offensively. So yeah, it does come back to, there's just a little bit too little depth on the bench, which is interesting, because we were talking when the squad was named about all the people who had missed out, and that it was really difficult. But now when you get to it, we're like, a couple of injuries actually highlights that we don't have a huge amount of depth in a few places. We do if we play the system of 5-3-1, and we don't want to score goals, but we have to go and score goals for the next 2 games. So yeah.
Because, Kathleen, that is the problem. The last 4 fixtures, it's 7 conceded and unscored. And we saw what Ireland could do when they went on the front foot against Australia. It felt almost a little bit rope it up. It was sit back and then use the energy, and when the subs came in, to use that energy to attack in the last 20-25 minutes. Is it going to be something similar against Canada tomorrow? And will this Ireland team create enough chances from open play?
That has been the great debate over here, I think, over the last couple of days, in that Vera always says, Vera is like very confident, will just say like, okay, we don't have players that are fast attacking out of the back. But if you look at the likes of, I don't know, someone like Niamh Farrelly, if she was in the squad, probably could attack fast out of the back. Vera will say, we don't have anyone on the bench who can come off and score a goal, but you're like, well,
Amber.
Yeah, well, there's Amber is the obvious example, but also like Abby came off the bench for those last like 20 minutes or so and played incredibly well. Like, Sinead, me and you were sitting beside each other at the time, and we were like, look at her go. This is so great. She's actually attacking, and she's actually taking the initiative to just like attempt something. And that was so good to see in that game, because we'd watch the team like kind of struggle, and it was all a bit turgid apart from the penalty. And that's a great debate. Like, do you put someone like Abby Larkin on from early days and attack like that, or do you get yourself to like 60 minutes and then go on the attack? And I don't know what's right or what's wrong, because like I'm not the international manager, but I also don't understand not giving players like Amber Barrett the opportunity to come on, knowing what she has done. Like the fact that she came on in Scotland and scored that goal was incredible. The fact that she came into that preliminary squad and knew that she hadn't played football properly in like the last 6 or 7 months and managed to get like the penalty and the goal. One of the only goals we scored from open play as well, her second one, when she teamed up with Ciara Grant. You're like, why at this stage, why not give those sort of players the opportunity? And I know Vera is like so set in her systems and she's so set in her ways, and I totally see what she's trying to do. But in my head, that game was just like crying out for someone who was just not trying to get on the end of a set piece. He was looking for like an Abby Larkin pass that was going to like make a little moment of magic. And at this stage, I feel like we have nothing to lose, because if we lose tomorrow, then all our hopes are gone.
I think the players will take a little bit of initiative. And I think from reading like what they have been saying in interviews and what they've been saying to us in interviews, is I think they're ready to take that initiative. And I think Abby Larkin has been a big part of that they were like, they had built up Abby Larkin. Like the whole story of Abby Larkin is this squad building her up from that Marbella training camp. Like all of the players wanted Abby to succeed. They saw that raw talent and they were like, so I think they have kind of taken their own like Abby project and like seen it to fruition and seen like, okay, that's Abby came on and did that 35 minutes. Okay, we can do that for ourselves. So I wouldn't call it quite a coup, but I think that the players themselves are going to take some initiative upon themselves and go, okay, we know we have to do the selfless tasks and we know we're going to play 5 at the back, but we're also not going to sit back and be scared tomorrow night. And that also kind of makes me a bit scared because Canada are in a very similar position to us. They are being criticised for not scoring enough goals. They are being criticised for not executing their chances properly. So this has all the hallmarks of something that should be an nil-all tomorrow, like 2 teams that are defensively minded, who pride themselves on clean sheets, who pride themselves on, grit and determination. So yeah, all the hallmarks of a nil-all, but because they're both under pressure to go and execute, to go and get 3 points and to go and get some goals, like hell, this could be a 3-all tomorrow before we know it. Like if 2 teams who aren't used to going at each other go at each other, like who knows what will happen.
Well, especially after like that Nigeria game, because like I watched it and the first thing that I thought after watching it was Canada play so similarly to us, where they're really, really good defensively, but also you don't know where the goals are going to come from. And we had Caroline Moscato today on the Koi Gig podcast, and she actually summed it up so well. She was like, this Canadian team are still discovering their identity and what they are. And the fact that they didn't have Jessie Fleming for that first game, like I think out of the 24 games that they've played since they won the Olympics, she's played nearly every single minute in every single one of them. And the only game she hasn't played in are the ones that they've lost. So for them, they're seeing her come back in and be like, this is incredible. We're going to do something. She is probably quite a bit more developed than an Abby Larkin, but that sort of player that's actually going to like take the game by the scruff of the neck and kind of bring the opportunities in for those open play goals. And that worries me slightly going into tomorrow, because as much as I rate Abby and I think she's great, and I've been on a journey where after that Marbella game, I didn't think she was up to international standard at all. I thought the girls were kind of congratulating her for very simple things that she was doing, and like she would do a very simple pass and everyone was almost over celebrating it, whereas in the months since then I think she's come on massively. I still don't think she's at quite that level to come into a team, and obviously everything's going to change. So I'm really interested to see what the Canada of tomorrow is like compared to the Canada that we saw in the Nigeria game, where everything was just like a little bit dead and a little bit tough to watch at times. And as much as I think you're right about tomorrow could be a 3-3, I also think it could be a 0-all, and we'll all leave the ground entirely frustrated and no one will be happy at the end of it.
And everyone will be like, oh, women's football is terribly boring. For me, the Jessie Fleming thing was I probably didn't have the correct reaction to the Sam Kerr thing, because when we found out about Sam Kerr being injured, I was like, oh, this is terrible for the tournament. I'm so upset for her. I hate hearing about injuries. If we're going to go and play someone, you prefer to play them full strength. Like, none of that makes sense. Like, it's way too pleasant of me as a sports fan. But with Jessie Fleming, I was like, she's injured anyway. I would have loved her just to stay injured for another game. Great just not to have her on the pitch tomorrow. So yeah, it is a bit of a blow to the Irish hopes. I think it would be, because I was watching the Nigeria-Canada game going, there's nothing to fear here. There was a lot to fear, going to face Australia, even with Sam Kerr gone. But yeah, if we were facing that Canada team that were facing Nigeria, there was nothing there to fear. And Jessie Fleming coming back gives that psychological boost, and also, the literal boost on the pitch as well.
That's what most of the Canadians were saying today. Even if she only plays 45 minutes, that'll be great for them, and they're excited for that. And you're like, God, if there's a player coming back and you only want them to play 45 minutes max, then they're probably going to make a massive impact in that time.
Yeah.
Sinead, I was listening to Emma and Kathleen on Koi Gig just before I came into the office earlier on, and they were talking about Bev Priestman's comments, and I like the fact that Emma said, I don't mind when Ireland are called physical and gritty and hard working. These are all probably good traits to be associated with a team. But I'm wondering how these comments will have gone down in the Irish camp, where Priestman said, I think from my perspective, we have to match their physicality and hope that our quality will eventually shine through, which in a way sounds kind of condescending, but as Emma kind of spun it, these aren't exactly qualities that Vera Pauw wouldn't want to see in her team.
Yeah, so they were the things that I picked out, and for our report on the 42, I was like, Priestman was kind of speaking from both sides of her mouth. Like, she was saying on one hand, we respect Ireland, and a lot of the traits that they have, we like to say that we have in Canada as well, like that, never say die attitude, that idea that you do anything for your country, the pride, the resilience, the spirit. But then she kept saying the marked difference would be quality. And she said it 3 or 4 times. So I was thinking, this is absolutely something that the Vera and the rest of the backroom team should be showing Katie McCabe, Denise O'Sullivan, Louise Quinn, and get the troops riled up tomorrow, because those players who I just named, there's not a gulf in quality between those players and the girls who'll be lining out for Canada tomorrow. And Priestman to kind of continually say that she doesn't expect any surprises from Ireland. She thinks that she knows exactly what she's getting. She's getting only spirit and resilience and heart, and that Canada that can then up the quality. Like, for me, it reminded me of like how we talk in the GA, like if you play junior B, like even the best players go down to junior B standard. That was kind of the vibe of what she was saying. And I was kind of thinking, hey, I'm a bit annoyed by this. Like, even though like we'd be the first to criticize, the players if they don't do well. And yeah, I think it could be a little bit of a motivating factor for Vera Pauw and the team when they hear it back, because it was just how often she said it. Like, she said it 3 or 4 times that, yeah, Ireland have all these great attributes, and she was praising them, and she was equating them to things that Canada have as well, but kept then caveating with, we'll bring our quality will shine forth, and we'll go and get the 3 points. So yeah, it was an interesting tack to take, I think. And definitely, as much as she said she was respecting Ireland, she was kind of disrespecting them a lot in the same breath.
It kind of reminded me, though, of the same way that like Gustafsson talked about Ireland before the Australia game, in that he was constantly trying to like write down the quality that was in the team, and then also egging up the likes of Katie McCabe or saying like, oh, well, we know the side of the team that we're going to attack. And I mean, most of us probably knew what he was talking about at the same time, but it just surprised me so much between the two managers, how much of a common thread there has been, at how willing they have been to top down Ireland when you do have world class players in the side, like Katie McCabe, like Denise O'Sullivan, like a lot of the other parts of the squad. Like, it's a strange tat to take in my head, because I think it's the sort of thing that's just only going to rile us up more. And I mean, we saw how much the team were up for it in the Australia game. Like, they certainly weren't holding back.
And I think it's funny, like in a 32 team World Cup, if you're facing a team that has undeniably 2 world-class players in Denise O'Sullivan, like that's 2 out of 11 guys. Like, that's pretty significant ratio in a World Cup where there'll be lots of teams who have 0 out of 11. You still have to go and respect them and beat them, like England versus Haiti or whatever. So it's just a very unusual thing to do, being like, oh, well, we have quality where they don't, despite the fact that they have Denise O'Sullivan and Katie McCabe. It's a strange way to think about a team. And I do think part of it, Gav Cummesky from the Irish Times asked this day about the physical thing. Like, has this just become a perception about Ireland that's not actually rooted in reality? Or are you playing up to refs? Or why has this become the narrative around this team?
Well, it came from like the Colombia game initially, I think. And then
no one even saw that.
No one even saw that. We only know about like the 22 minutes that we've heard about everywhere. And then in the Australia game, even like, I know me and Gav Cooney from the 42 were on talking about it after the fact. And like, I criticized Katie once or twice, just saying, I think she went in hard on some tackles. And I was inundated with people being like, it was a fair battle. Like, and I was like, I also criticized Hayley Raso about the amount of times that she was going in on Katie. And I thought it was a very specific ploy that the Australian team employed, that they were like, we are going to try and get in Katie's head and we're going to try and get her to foul, because there is the whole thing of like,
I had said something very similar after the 42, that they had targeted Heather Payne for those balls, the long balls over her head or the through balls, and they targeted Katie to try and get in her head. I had said the exact same, Kathleen.
Yeah, but like people were so annoyed at me, and I was like, no, I was criticizing Australia as much, because I think like Hayley Raso, it should have been like a GA situation where Katie and Hayley were like pulled aside and they were like, yellow, right, calm down, it's all sorted, it's all done. And that wasn't the case on the night. But you could see the tactics that they were trying to employ. And I don't know how this is somehow now morphed into Ireland or a rough team. I mean, look at Louise Quinn. She's walking around with a massive shiner on her head, like a boot on her foot. It's clearly not just us that are playing this way. Like, we're playing to the standard that is expected of us. And if you watch the Colombia game today, even like half the players spent most of their time rolling around on the pitch in the way you'd expect from a men's side rather than a women's side. So it's definitely not just a problem associated with Ireland, but for some reason it's a tag that has been put onto us now.
Yeah, it's just tournament football. Like,
Sinead, we've had a few good underdog stories so far, and tournament debutants have been doing reasonably okay at the tournament. What is your hope or expectation for tomorrow?
Two different questions in there.
Possibly.
Yeah. Genuinely, my hope is a win, and I think it is plausible, possible. Like, I would caveat that with coming into the World Cup, I was very aware, and a scenario that I think was very realistic was we would have a lovely moment with a full stadium in Stadium Australia, but we would unfortunately go on and lose 3 games, but make a good account of ourselves. So I still think that is something that is possible. Like, it's our first major tournament. You know, we still aren't, like, everything I've just said about Denise and Katie, like, we still aren't quite at, you know, the level that we can beat a really, really strong team like Australia. And we unfortunately are in a group that's really difficult. You know, we don't have easy pickings across the 3 games that we have. But because we gave such a good account of ourselves on Thursday, and I think because there is, you know, the possibility of a really good performance from this team, my hope is that we could get a win. My expectation is that it might be a 0-0 draw. It might go back to stereotypes and neither team will score. So I think they're my hopes and expectations. A loss, I think, would be really tough. I think a loss would be really, really, really tough on the team after the performance on Thursday. The confidence that they're going into this game with, the fact that Canada aren't performing very well, the fact that the Canada-Nigeria game was a bit flat. I think a loss would be really disappointing and just a killer for the whole tournament from an Irish perspective.
I wonder, Kathleen, if we were talking in 24 hours' time, would a draw seem like a bad result, given that the draw that's already occurred between Canada and Nigeria, a draw would at least keep Ireland in it going into the last round of games. Again, I'm not sure, how would you view a draw if that was what was to happen tomorrow?
I think if it was a 0-0 draw, I would view it as a disappointing result. I think if it was like a 1-1 or a 2-2 and we scored from open play, I would see that as a positive. Just because that's the thing we've struggled with the most. I've said since before the tournament started that I think
open play is a big ask, Kathleen.
Well, that's what I mean.
2-2 and open play. Come on now.
Well, no, if it was a 1-1 and we had a goal from open play, I'd be pretty happy.
I'm taking a 1-0 with penalties, just like realistic over here. Yeah, go on.
Hopes and expectations, though, Sinead. I have 24 hours to live out my dream. No, but I've said since before this tournament started that I think people have underestimated Canada because of the way things have been working with their federation, where they haven't been getting the respect that they should have. They haven't had as many warm-up games. If you look across the board in those first games, the teams that were expected to perform well have by and large, apart from maybe like one or two, not actually had massive results against their home or against the teams they were playing. So I don't know how much we can judge those first games off. I think Canada are massively talented. I know, again, Sinead and I were upping Canadian McCabe and Denise O'Sullivan. I think they're very talented. I do think Canada have one or two players who are slightly more talented at the moment and playing at a higher level than some of our players are. That said, having looked at how we performed against Australia, I totally think that performance is in our team. It's just the goals. That's the thing that I really, really struggle with. I would love to say, my heart says tomorrow Ireland are going to win 2-1. Not saying from open play, but like 2-1, we will do it. And I would love that. But there's just a realistic point in my head that I do think that Canada are going to beat us tomorrow. And I don't think it'll be that much a shock to me anyways, as much as it will be to other people. And I do appreciate the fact that like I watched quite a lot of NWSL whenever I worked with ESPN, so I probably am familiar with more of these players. But yeah, it's I think if we're sitting here in 24 hours having said everything, we will clearly be happy if we have a draw. But yeah, if we have a draw, it puts the whole rest of the tournament in other people's hands. And that's the thing that's really frustrating when you look at how close we were against Australia.
Yeah, and that's why our expectations have shifted. So like we've always said that we could see a pathway to 4 points from this group. And the pathway to 4 points was always a point against Australia and 3 points against Nigeria. It's just the ordering of the games now has changed how we want that to work, because we want our 3 points now and our 1 point next week. Thank you very much. So, if tomorrow's a draw, we will absolutely take it. If tomorrow's a draw and we have a moment and we have a goal. I was talking tonight to a guy who plays football in Perth who's been here for almost 20 years. And, he was saying he just wants an Irish moment. And he's right. Like if we get a goal, and particularly if we get a goal from open play, like Kathleen's saying, if we get a good goal from open play, that's a World Cup moment that we can remember forever. A Katie
McCabe screener, Sinead. That's what we need.
That's what I keep saying. Katie McCabe screamer. Come on. We know she can do it. And we haven't had one for Ireland in a while.
We deserve it. Yeah, I would take a Louise Quinn header as well, to be fair. Any of that central veteran group, any of them score, and I will be absolutely delighted.
I think a screamer could come from the penalty spot. We could well call that a screamer.
Yeah.
Kathleen, before we finish up, for anyone who hasn't caught the new Koi gig, which dropped this afternoon, our time, you get a very interesting Canadian perspective ahead of the game this week.
Yeah, we had Carmelina Moscato on, who's played in 3 World Cups, won a CONCACAF and an Olympic bronze title. So very, very well experienced with the Canadian team and is very close to the Canadian team as well. So she had some really good insight. So you can get that on your OTB football feeds or else the Koi Gig pod, wherever you get your podcasts, you will also find it.
Great stuff. You can also follow Koi Gig on Twitter as well. The Women's World Cup show here and Off the Ball with Sure Non-Stop Protection Deodorant, official sponsor of the FIFA Women's World Cup 2023. Sinead and Kathleen, thanks a million.
Thanks, Will. Talk to you tomorrow.
The Women's World Cup show
on Off the Ball
with Sure Non-Stop Protection Deodorant, official sponsor of the FIFA Women's World Cup 2023.